When the Torah tells us that Yisro had come with his daughter, with his Moshe's wife and his children to the Midbar, and where was he camped? Asher Choneh Shom Har Elokim. Where he was camped, that Har Elokim. The Torah is making the point. When he went out to the desert, and where in the desert did he go? Har Elokim. So the Torah is identifying and revealing immediately. Why did he go into the desert? There's a wilderness. Because he was at Har Elokim, because that's Har Sinai. Because the Torah was going to be given at that location. That's why he went there. Vayomel Moshe, Ani chosencha bo ilecho. I, your father-in-law, am coming to you, the ishtcho shnei vanech imo, with your wife and her two children with her. What is exactly he saying to Moshe? So Rashi will be the famous Rashi. V'yomel Moshe al yidei shaliach ani chosencha bo Yisro. Emenato yotze b'gini. If you're not going to come to greet me because of my own value, say b'ginishtra. You should come out to greet me for the sake of your wife, on behalf of your wife. Emenato yotze b'ginishtra. Say begin Shnei Bonel. You should go come out and greet us for the sake of your two sons. And what do you need all this? If not for me, it should be for the sake of your wife. If not your wife, it should be for my sake. Okay? For the sake of your children. Firstly, why did you show up at Moshe's doorstep? What do you have to send this message? Let's say he would have showed up suddenly. What would have been? Moshe, everything would have followed as what happened, even with the sending him this message. But it's interesting. We had mentioned that when Yaakov came to Egypt, the level of acknowledgement and glory Yaakov was given in the history of the world, there was never such a level of acknowledgement and glory given to a person. Why? So the Medrash says, the one who saw Yosef going out to greet Yaakov, who was the viceroy of Egypt, who do you think followed? The what? The courtiers of Paro, and then the elders, and then the populace, and Yaakov's family. Every Egyptian, Egypt was the height of civilization. The whole society came out to greet Yaakov. The level of acknowledgement Yaakov received in the history of the world, there was never such a level of acknowledgement. The kavod that he was given. And what happened afterwards there, as I once pointed out? What was the bracha that Yaakov had given to Paro? It was the famine. That whenever Paro goes down to the Nile rises and waters the fields. The water goes into the irrigation ditches, and as a result of that, the famine stopped. Why was Yaakov concerned that he'd be deified? Al notik b'reim Mitzrayim, because it was known, it became public knowledge that until then the famine was so severe that the bounty had been forgotten. And all of a sudden, this miracle man shows up. He gives a blessing to the king. The famine stops. The Nile rises. See, if Yaakov would have just shown up, Yosef, everything would have been like QT, and then Yaakov would give the blessing to Paro. They would say, Paro somehow has godly powers. But because it was only happened as a result of Yaakov coming to Egypt, people understood that the resolvement of the famine was due to Yaakov's bracha. Therefore, Yaakov now is concerned he's to be deified. I'll not sit buried in Mitzrayim. I don't want to be buried in Egypt because they're going to deify me. Who is the other person who received the greatest level of acknowledgement in the history of the world? Even though the numbers were not the same. And in the eyes of the world, maybe it was Yisro. When Yisro came out to the desert and Moshe went out to greet him. So the Medrash says, when Yisro came and Moshe went out, don't you think Aaron Abanov went out to greet Yisro? And when Aaron Abanov went out to greet Yisro, don't you think the Zakanim went out to greet Yisro? And when the Zakanim went out to greet Yisro, Don't you think the heads of the tribes went out to greet Yisro? And don't you think the whole populace, that every Jew went out to greet Yisro? Therefore, Yisro, as a result of his coming, he was acknowledged and received the glory of the world, the greatest glory. Now, just simple. Egypt was the height of civilization. Egypt was acknowledged by the world as the ultimate. When Yaakov came to Egypt, this society, which is the height of civilization, power, everything, it values Yaakov, this little old Jew. Okay? There must be something special about him. But here, this is the Jewish people. We're not talking about the world came out to greet Yisro. Now, the story here is post Kriyas Yamsuf. That's what it is. So who is Klal Yisrael in the eyes of the world now? This is the nation that on their behalf God split the sea and destroyed the Egyptians and all the plagues. And in the Was Yisro it says the world trembled as a result of what Hashem had done on behalf of the Jews. So the Jewish people, even maybe number-wise, and maybe they're in a desert, but if they go out and acknowledge Yisro, this is the ultimate honor. This is the ultimate. So Yisro, as a result of informing Moshe's coming, and Moshe now comes to greet him, Moshe goes, Aaron and his sons go, the Zakenim go, and everybody follows. So as a result of this incident, Yisro was a beneficiary of the greatest glory that ever was experienced by a human being. Okay? Now let's talk. That's a reality. Now, who is Yisro? Yisro originally was an idolater. Yisro was not a Jew. He's a convert. Now the question is to give acknowledgement to a person where his background was what? Was idolatry. Although he became a convert. It's not so simple that you should give such value to such a person. Because people may think that, it has something to do with his background. Not the now, but the past. So acknowledging that person, you never know what the takeaway could be. You never know. And Yisro understood this. He understood if he would come, what the response would be. Moshe comes, the whole Klal Yisrael comes. If that's the case, Moshe may be very reticent and hesitant. He's not coming out to greet Yisro. So Yisro says to Moshe, he sends the message, if you don't come out on my behalf to acknowledge me, come out on behalf of your daughter, of your wife, Ishtacho. Not my daughter, your wife. So people will understand you're going out because of your wife. But your wife is a convert. She's the daughter of what? Of Yisro. You should come out on behalf of your children, because the children, that's you. That's who you are. They were born from a convert, but they're your children. That's why Yisro understood this. Therefore, he said, if not on my behalf, on behalf of your wife, and not your wife, the children. Your children. What is, you see from the Midrash, so what is Hashem? Why did Moshe go out to greet him? Was it his own decision, or Hashem told him to go out? The Midrash says, Moshe, you go out and greet him. He's asking my behalf, your wife, you go out to greet him on his behalf. Why? Because you realize he was an idolater, and he gave it up all for me, even to come out into the desert. Therefore, he's deserving of that acknowledgement. And he's worthy of that honor. This is the Midrash. So that clearly says, what was his hesitation? Because he was an idolater who became a convert. So to value that person to that degree, maybe not. Hashem says, no, because of that, he abandoned idolatry for my sake. And because he did that for my sake, he's deserving of what? Of this level of honor. That's the Midrash. So the Midrash says elsewhere, not here, and the Baal HaTurim says it elsewhere. How many times do you think idolatry is mentioned in the Torah? I once mentioned this. 48 times. How many times is Torah mentioned in the Torah? 48 times. You understand? 48 times. Which means, what is the two sides of the equation? You have idolatry on one, and you have Torah on the other side. The only way you could contend with the idolatry The ultimate level of clarity and truth is ner mitzvah Torah or. You have to have that level of clarity of or of the Torah. Only then could you contend with what, with the opposition, what idolatry represents. It's called like Shlomo says, Zelu Mazeh. One is pitted against the other. Torah on one side is pitted against idolatry on the other side. We receive the Torah, what happens? Moshe is delayed. We already heard the 10 Commandments. He's delayed based on miscalculation. Where did the Jews go? Idolatry. The Chet Eged. So what undermined the Torah itself? What was the opposing force that counted the Torah? It was idolatry. Because that's both sides of the equation. We'd once asked, the Gemara says that the Bayis Rishon was destroyed because they violated the 3 cardinal sins. Gili Araisa Gorazor Shvitas Domim. 3 cardinal sins. And the Gemara says in 2 locations, based on the pasuk in Eicha, that the reason why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed was because Torah Ozovu, because they abandoned the Torah. It's based on the pasuk in Eicha. So it seems to be because they abandoned the Torah. It has nothing to do with the 3 cardinal sins. So we explained in the past that if the Jews would have been involved in Torah sufficiently, they would have had a level of clarity. They would have never succumbed to the temptations of the 3 cardinal sins. It's only because they abandoned the Torah, even though Rabbeinu Yonah explains that Gemara, they were involved, but they didn't learn it. They weren't involved for the right reason. Therefore, it did not generate the clarity and the kedusha which was sufficient to count Avodah Zorah. And therefore, they went off the cliff because they didn't have that foundation and which would have generated that understanding. So again, it's 2 sides. You have the Torah, you have the clarity, you have the fortitude to withstand all those temptations, to deflect all that. If you don't have the Torah at the right level, then you succumb to those temptations. Ultimately, why was it destroyed? Because they were at the bottom of the hill. But what was the cause of it? They what? Because Torah says over, because they abandoned the Torah. But again, this is the Memches 48. Now, it says in Pirkei Avos, there are 48 ways to acquire the Torah. 48. Why are there 48? You have to address all 48 levels, and then you have Torah at that most advanced level. Because you have to have it at that most advanced level to be able to counter all the various levels of impurity, to be able to understand why it's totally not acceptable at any level. And only when you have that level of fortitude, only then could you counter whatever idolatry represents. Question we asked: why Jesus just show up Moshe's door? I'm here, right? Firstly, you could say, as we just said, because he hesitated because maybe Moshe wouldn't have accepted him because of this. But you say, no, it's only because of the glory, okay? So the Sefarno says over here, the Gemara says in Nida that Hashem does not tolerate certain people. We had said one of them is a person who enters into someone's house without alerting him that he's coming through the door, and even one in his own home. You walk into your house, your wife is there. Even for your wife, or into the bedroom, without first knocking, that you should be aware that you're coming, because she may walk in when she's doing something on a personal level, she may be embarrassed. So walking in, it's a lack of consideration for that person. Therefore, you alert the person in advance, you're coming, that if the person is doing something at that moment, which may be embarrassing, the person would be aware of it. And if you don't, it's considered a corrupt characteristic. This is the Gemara Nida. So the Sefarno says here, the reason why Yisro sent the messenger, I'm coming, to alert Moshe, he shouldn't show up suddenly. Because maybe Moshe would have wanted to prepare, or whatever it is. It's a lack of consideration. That's why Yisro alerted him in advance that he's coming. That's the Sefarno here on location. Vayetze Moshe, Likras Chosno. So again, it doesn't say he goes out to greet his wife and his children. Likras Chosno, he's going out towards his father-in-law. And that's what Hashem says. Your father-in-law, because he converted, he deserves every level of acknowledgement that exists because of what he did. Vayishtachu, he bowed, vayishiklo, when he kissed him. Vayishlu ish l'reu l'shalom. Each asked about the other one's welfare. Vayavu olah. And he came into the tent. Let's take a look at Rashi. Vayetze Moshe, Kovod Godol Niskabed Yisro Bosasho, Kevod Sheyotza Moshe. At that moment, the level of honor which Yisro received was exceptional. Kevod Sheyotza Moshe, Yotza Aaron Nod Vaviu, Umishu Roa Es Elu Yotza Bil Yotza. And if anyone would see these people going out who did not go out, as though the whole college went out to greet Yisro. Vishtach Yishiklo. Says he bowed and he kissed him. Who bowed to who? Did Yisro bow to Moshe, or did Moshe bow to Yisro? Ish l're'eyu. Mi kori ish. Who's the ish? Is that Moshe? Shenemar. Or ish Moshe. So who bowed? Moshe bowed to Yisro. He kissed Yisro. What is this? We discussed what is bowing is full prostration. Prostration means I'm like the dust of the earth in your presence. Total negation. So what level of acknowledgement and value is Moshe giving? It's not only, as I said, all clouds are going out to value Yisro. Moshe, who's the ultimate, he says, I am the equivalent of dust unto your feet. That's what I am. You know what that means? To the degree that Moshe is valuing and acknowledging Yisro, the greatest Jew ever walked the face of the earth is bowing before Yisro, full prostration. Vayisheklo, and he kisses him. Now, there's a question which is asked with the Sefarno addresses, which is obvious. It's obvious if you notice it, that originally, why was Moshe so obstinate at the burning bush? Because ultimately, he was concerned that if he accepts the position to be the Redeemer, it'll be an affront to Aaron, his older brother. So at the end of the day, Hashem says, not only will your brother not be offended, he will come out and greet you in the desert, v'samach b'libo. He'll have joy in your heart when he hears that you were chosen to be the Goel. So you don't have to be concerned that there'll be any affront here, okay? The Torah tells us, well, Moshe came, Vayetze, Aaron Hamidbora, he went out to the Midbar, Vayishaklo, and he kissed him, if you remember the pasuk. The Torah tells us he went out to greet him in the desert, as Hashem said, and he kissed him. Aaron kissed Moshe. Now, Moshe and Aaron was older than Moshe, and evidently he esteemed Moshe tremendously. Moshe esteemed him, especially he heard that he's chosen to be the Goel, and he's going with joy. What does Torah have to tell me? These two brothers haven't seen each other for 60 years. Moshe is returning now after 60 years. When two brothers who had a special relationship, they don't see each other for 60 years. Isn't it understood that when they meet, they embrace and they kiss? So why does Torah go out of its way to tell me and they kissed? He's sharing this piece of information with us that he kissed him. You know what that means? So he says, Ki'ilu Adam Noshek Sefer Torah. When a person kisses Sefer Torah, why do you kiss it? You kiss it because of its holiness, because it's something very special. When Aaron kissed his brother, it wasn't because it's brotherly love. He hadn't seen him for 60 years. Because Moshe, what does he represent? He's the equivalent, he's an article of the ultimate level of Kedusha. Because he's the Goel. That's why he kissed him. Like a person would kiss a Sefer Torah, that's why Aaron kissed Moshe. Otherwise, this piece of information is totally not important for us to know. No, to tell us Torah is going to reveal this to identify who Moshe is. He's an object of Kedusha, and that's why Aaron is kissing him. That's what the Torah is telling us. Over here, when the Torah says Moshe kissed Yisro, first he bows to him, then he kisses him. What does he kiss him? And this is done before he goes into the tent. This is in public view. So what does it mean? That he's the ultimate. After Hashem says, you should value him as the ultimate, do you know what he abandoned? And that's what Moshe went out, although he knew what would follow. This level of glory, which is one of a kind. So once Hashem says he's deserving that glory, you negate yourself. You bow, I am the dust unto your feet. I kiss you, but there's nothing more precious than you because of what you've done. He kissed him. Same thing. Person's Baal Tshuva. At the age of 6, the person becomes Baal Tshuva. Until then, no Shabbos, no Kashrus, nothing. All of a sudden, it becomes a Tshuva. You have Ramosha Feinstein, where a Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik doesn't stand. Ramosha Feinstein walks into the room, everybody acknowledges him. This Baal Tshuva walks in, right? Nobody stands. He says, "What's going on over here?" I'm greater than Moshe Feinstein because where the Baal Tshuva stands, even the tzaddik doesn't stand. So he deserves acknowledgement, equivalent of the leading Torah sage of the generation, tzaddikim. We don't differentiate which tzaddik. The Mokesh Baal Tshuva omnitz afil tzaddikim gemurim, absolute tzaddikim, they don't stand. Does that mean they're on par in regarding everything they represent? The answer is definitely not. There's a certain aspect of the Baal Tshuva that even the tzaddik doesn't have that particular aspect, but it doesn't mean the totality of the Baal Tshuva is the tzaddik gomor. He's not. The person never sinned. The convert has his value, but the totality is not what it. He doesn't have everything you need to be the king, to marry the Kohen or whatever it is, because that's the ultimate pedigree of the Jewish people is the kuna. Somebody in Or Sameach once asked me, he says he doesn't understand. He's a student at Or Sameach, and he already bought himself a black cat. So why don't they give him the honor like they give the rabbis? That's the question this young man asked me. You understand where he's coming from? Not because he went to MIT or to Wharton, because he has that background, those credentials. No, I'm a Baal Tshuva. So I explained to him. That's not quite what it means. Not that he's the Baal Tshuva yet. You know, I'm a Baal Tshuva. I don't eat in non-kosher restaurants, even fish. I'm really a Baal Tshuva. What about your Shabbos? What about your other things? Well, I'm not there yet. So you're not quite the Baal Tshuva yet. What you're supposed to be the Baal Tshuva. Vayisabim Moshe lechosto iskol asher osa Hashem lefaro ulemitzrayim al odos Yisrael. He explained to his father-in-law all that Hashem had done to Paro and Egypt because of the Jewish people. Meaning, it's not because they were evil. It's that, Hashem is only willing to tolerate misbehavior to a point. The Medrash says over there, when the Mako started, Hashem never ever displayed his might and rained in on people like at that moment, because who did they enslave? Because they enslaved Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. So Moshe is explaining that whatever was done was al odos Yisrael, only because of what they had done to the Jewish people. That they were evil, they would have done to others, Hashem would have let it go, and the day of reckoning in the future. But that he displayed his might and his power as he did, all that was al odos Yisrael, was only because of Klal Yisrael. And all that what they had experienced on the way, which is what? Milchemes HaMolek, as we said earlier. They had no food, they had no water. These were all the bumps in the road till they got there. Ve'etzilim Hashem. And despite what they were exposed to, Hashem came through to them. He saved them. Rashi, why is Moshe sharing all this with Yisro? Limshoch es libo lekarva leTorah. To draw him, to bring him closer to Torah. So what's the obvious question? He's called Chovev. He abandoned his glory to come into the desert. For what reason? For the sake of the Torah. So therefore, nothing in the world had value compared to the Torah. And now Moshe has to go and somehow entice him to be drawn to the Torah. Why is he doing it? But it says that's why he's sharing all this information with him. Limshul Haslibo Lekarva Torah. So Rashi, the Sischem explains what's the basis. What originally drew him into the desert? Here at Kriyas Yamsuf, here at Bechem Samolek, here all this, he heard it already. So what does Moshe have to review it again? He originally came into the desert because of what he heard. So why is he telling everything? The answer is libshoch, to draw him to Torah. That's what he's doing it. You would say, you hear something, but when you hear it from the person who experienced it, and nobody could explain it the way Moshe could explain it, as we explained by Kriyas Yamsuf, we repeated after him because he understood it. His words did not miss a nuance of what took place at Kriyas Yamsuf. If we would have expressed ourselves, we would have missed maybe 90% of what actually happened there. When Moshe said it, his words included everything, what happened. So when we sing the praises at Yamsuf and say Moshe's words, those words contain every aspect of Kriyas Yamsuf. So when you hear it from Moshe, you may have heard, but whatever level you heard, it's not the way I'm communicating it. It was overwhelmingly impressive. It was enough to draw you here. But you could come there, but there's always certain issues. Maybe you'll get discouraged. Maybe it's too much. Maybe you'll have a bad experience. Moshe Rabbeinu is explained to in a way that regardless, it's the ultimate, that nobody could appreciate what it is the way Moshe could explain it. I'll give you an example. A person wants to buy a piece of property, okay? And he hears it's one of a kind of buy, and he's in the real estate business. And he has the means to buy it. So, of course, he's hearing about it. He reads the prospectus. He reads everything about it. He wants to go see it in real time. He goes, sees the property, he gets everybody to make an evaluation. And it's very costly. Person says, I heard it, it's one of a kind, but in terms of the price, it just may be too much for me. It's too complicated. I have to liquidate all my assets to have enough money to buy it, this and that. Maybe it's not worth it. So the one who's selling it feels that it's important this person should buy it, and he wants to show him not only what he sees based on his evaluation, he's going to show him the potential, what the amount of money you could make, because how you could develop this, and therefore it's one of a kind of an opportunity. Once he hears it the way that the seller explains it, and he shows him this is fact, no matter how much he has to pay, he's buying this. Because whatever it costs, it pales compared to what the profits that he's going to make. He's impressed, goes out to the desert, this and this, whatever. But you understand, it's not simple. There are challenges that you have when you become a Jew. The Torah, it's a whole different level. But when Moshe explained to him firsthand everything, the Torah, now this will secure it. He's not leaving. After Moshe Rabbeinu goes and explains what he did, Kidei l'moshcho l'karva l'Torah, to bring close to Torah. The Gemara tells us in Brochos that divrei Torah tzrichi chizuk, that when a person studies Torah, you always have to upshore it. You always have to strengthen yourself. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Talmud Torah, until when do you have to study Torah? The Rambam writes, until you die. Here, until your last breath, you have to be engaged in Torah. Why? Because the moment you stop studying, you begin forgetting. Therefore, you have to be involved continuously until the last moment of your life. Because if you stop, that detachment causes you to forget. So what is the tavlin? You have to have that antidote to the Yetzer Hara. If there's any lapse, immediately, he's right on your back. He's right in your head. He's already switching the gears on you. So therefore, if you begin forgetting, the moment you stop learning, the forgetting process begins. Therefore, the Rambam writes, the obligation to study is until the last moment of your life. Therefore, you always need chizuk. Torah always needs chizuk. We take no chances because we're always subject to that onslaught, which is called Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Therefore, Moshe, it has to be l'moshcha l'Torah, l'karva l'Torah. Eskolat lo, shalayam shel amorik. Hatlo. Okay? All this was done on behalf of Yisrael. Hashem only did this for the sake of Klal Yisrael. So it's not because they were bad people, but because of what they did for the way they subjected Klal Yisrael. And if you read later, what was he impressed? Because the way Moshe explained to him, he explained to him the Midah Keneged Midah, that every plague was exactly measure for measure. And he was amazed that Hashem did not leave out a detail of punishment measure for measure because of what they did to Klal Yisrael. But you can only have that appreciation only if Moshe explains it to you. Because he had that understanding. If you take a look in Rashi, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked the question, which was unacceptable, and because of that, he didn't go into the land, Hashem says to Moshe, Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lahem. The patriarchs, I promised them things and I never came through. They never questioned me. And you, which I revealed to you, Shmi, Yudke Vavke, you asked this kind of question. Shmi Hashem lo nadati lahem. So over there, Rashi explains, what is Yudke Vavke? To be able to perform the miracles, that it should be exactly measure for measure. To understand how that works. This is the inner workings of existence, reward and punishment. So when Moshe explained it to Yisro, what did he explain to him? How exactly this was measure for measure, and why it was measure for measure. And why did he do it? Measure for measure, because he did it. Odus Yisrael, on behalf of the Jewish people. Okay, the bell went off. Today you're able to